Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The first time I noticed something change between us, it was so subtle I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. For as long as I could remember, David had been a fixture in my life. He was my father's best friend, the man who was always around at barbecues, birthdays, holidays. He had been there since before I was even born, sharing laughter, whiskey, and late-night poker games with my dad in the den. To me, he was always just Uncle David, though he wasn't related by blood. He was steady, reliable, safe, a part of my childhood wallpaper. But that summer, when I returned home from college, things felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe I had grown up without realizing it, and the world was simply reacting to the change. Or maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on me one evening, just a fraction too long, while we were sitting on the back porch, watching. The fireflies cut through the dusk. I was 21, restless, and trying to figure out who I was outside of my father's shadow. David, on the other hand, was in his mid-40s, married to a woman who rarely accompanied him to our house anymore. Everyone whispered about the distance between them, though no one ever said it outright. I only knew that when he laughed with my father, it often sounded forced, as if something heavy lived beneath his skin. That night on the porch, my dad had gone inside to grab another round of drinks. David and I were left alone with the hum of cicadas and the glow of the citronella candles. I remember how he looked at me then, not inappropriately, not yet, but with an intensity I hadn't felt before. His eyes softened, then sharpened, like he was seeing me for the first time, not as a child, but as someone else entirely. My chest tightened. I looked away quickly, pretending to study the stars, but my pulse betrayed me in the days that followed. I kept catching him watching me. At the grill, when I leaned over the counter, at the lake when I waded into the water. It was never blatant, always subtle, a flicker of attention quickly withdrawn. But I felt it. A charge that hadn't existed before. I tried to shake it off, but something inside me responded to it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the ache of wanting to be noticed by someone who shouldn't notice me at all. I began to test it wearing dresses that clung a little tighter, speaking to him with a softness I hadn't used before, lingering in conversations longer than necessary. Each time his jaw tightened, each time he cleared his throat and forced his eyes away. It thrilled me in ways I didn't want to admit. The breaking point came one afternoon when my father had gone into town and left, David helping me fix the old screen door on the porch. It was hot, the kind of humid heat that made clothes stick to skin. I was holding the frame steady while he worked with a screwdriver, sweat dripping down his temple. When the door finally clicked into place, he leaned back and let out a breath. A victory. I laughed, clapping for him without thinking, and he turned toward me. Something in the air shifted. His hand brushed mine when he took the screwdriver back, and neither of us moved away. We stood too close, the space between us suddenly suffocating. His eyes dropped to my lips, and I swear the world stopped moving. My heart slammed against my ribs, but then he stepped back, shaking his head. "I shouldn't," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He set the screwdriver down and walked away, leaving me trembling in the doorway. After that, avoidance became his shield. He was distant, careful, never letting us be alone in the same room. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, the heat in his eyes, the way his restraint felt like the most intoxicating temptation of all. One night, weeks later, it happened again. My father had gone on a weekend fishing trip, and David stopped by to drop off some tools he had borrowed. I was alone in the house, curled on the couch with a book. He knocked, and when I opened the door, his eyes did that same faltering thing. Like he was torn in two. We sat for a while, making small talk that carried too much weight. When I got up to pour us iced tea, I felt his gaze follow me. When I turned, his hand was already reaching from mine across the counter. I froze, the glass sweating in my palm, and then his fingers brushed against mine, gentle, deliberate. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered, though his eyes betrayed how badly he wanted me to. "I can't help it. I whispered back. The silence stretched, breaking only when he leaned forward, his breath trembling against my cheek. And then he kissed me. Soft at first, almost afraid. But then, with a hunger that had been locked away for too long, it was reckless, forbidden, and utterly consuming. Every touch was laced with the weight of betrayal, not only of his wife, but of my father, his best friend. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. All that existed was the way he made me feel alive, the way he saw me not as a girl, but as a woman who had somehow unraveled the walls he had built around himself. We pulled apart eventually, both gasping, both terrified. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "This is wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't want this." But when I reached for him, he didn't move away. And in the end, it didn't matter how many times he said it was wrong. Because we both knew we had already crossed a line we could never uncross. That night burned itself into me like a secret scar. After he left, I sat in the silence of the house, tasting his kiss still on my lips, hearing the tremor in his voice when he said it was wrong. I should have felt guilty. I should have been afraid of what it meant, but all I felt was alive, like someone had woken me up from years of sleepwalking. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of tension. When David came by the house now, he tried not to linger, but the way his eyes flicked toward me, the way he gripped the back of his chair too tightly, betrayed him. And I knew I was guilty too. I started finding excuses to be around whenever he was there. I'd drift into the kitchen while he helped my father fix something. I'd sit on the porch steps just to watch them talk. Even when he avoided me, he couldn't hide how badly he was avoiding me. The second time it happened, there was no excuse. My dad had gone to a late poker night, and David stopped by to drop something off. I had been sitting on the floor of the living room, books scattered around me, pretending to study while waiting for him. He hesitated in the doorway when he saw me, as if torn between leaving and stepping inside. I stood, and we locked eyes for too long. Neither of us said anything as I walked closer. I should have stopped myself, but I didn't. My hand brushed his as I took the bag from him, and before I could think, he had me pressed back against the wall, his mouth crashing onto mine like all the restraint he'd been holding back had finally broken loose. It was desperate, messy, dangerous. His hands cupped my face like he wanted to memorize it, his breath shaking as he whispered my name like it was something he had been holding back for years. I clung to him, terrified it would all vanish if I let go. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his chest heaving. "I can't stay," he whispered, and his voice broke. But still, he kissed me again, slower this time, almost mournful, as if he already knew we were creating something that couldn't end. Well, from then on, it was impossible to pretend. Every glance carried the weight of what we had done. Every brush of his hand was a spark. We lived in stolen moments, slipping into corners when no one was watching, exchanging looks across crowded rooms, his hand grazing the small of my back, when my father wasn't paying attention, and yet with every secret touch came the crushing fear of being caught. My father trusted in more than anyone in the world. If he ever knew it would break him, sometimes I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the betrayal, the disaster we were walking toward. But then I would remember the way David's lips trembled against mine, the way his hands shook like I was the only thing keeping him steady, and the guilt would blur into desire all over again. One evening, after a family barbecue, I slipped away to the upstairs hallway, needing a breath of quiet away from the laughter and clinking glasses. A few moments later, David followed. The look on his face was all I needed to know. He closed the door behind him, leaned back against it, and just looked at me. No words, just hunger and sorrow and something that looked dangerously like love. He kissed me. It was different. Slower, deeper, not just need, but a confession he couldn't put into words. I clutched at him like I couldn't stand the thought of him letting go, like every second was borrowed. Why are we doing this? I whispered against his mouth, my voice trembling. Because I can't stop. He whispered back, and I felt the truth of it in every shiver that passed through him. We stayed like that, in a fragile world of our own making, knowing the risk was too high but unable to walk away. Every time he touched me, it felt like falling deeper into something that could never be safe, something that could never be simple. But neither of us wanted simple anymore, and beneath all of it, the secrecy, the guilt, the fire was the unspoken. Truth neither of us dared to say out loud, but somewhere along the way, we had crossed from wanting each other into needing each other. The nights that followed became a blur of shadows and whispered words that could never see the light of day. David and I tried to keep our distance, but the harder we tried, the closer we seemed to drift. My father would talk about him over dinner, praising his loyalty, his friendship, his kindness, and every word was a knife in my chest. I would smile and nod, pretending to agree, all the while aching with the secret only David and I shared. It was almost unbearable, the way the tension built. The stolen looks, the touches that lasted half a second too long, the silent language. Only we understood. Every time my father left the room, I would feel David's eyes on me, and my body would betray me. I'd flush, tremble, shift nervously, praying no one else noticed. He carried himself like nothing was wrong, but I knew better. I saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands fidgeted when I was near, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. One Saturday, my father asked David to help him with some repairs in the garage. I stayed inside, pretending to study, but I couldn't focus. When my dad stepped out to buy supplies, David came inside to grab a glass of water. The moment our eyes met, I knew something was about to happen. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was louder than words. I stood, and he set the glass down without taking a sip. We crossed the distance like magnets, colliding before either of us could stop it. His mouth was on mine, urgent and desperate, as if the time apart had only starved him more. He pulled me against him, and I felt his entire body trembling. His hands tangled in my hair, sliding down my back as though he wanted to hold me so tightly the world couldn't pull us apart. When we broke away, gasping, his eyes searched mine with a kind of desperation I had never seen in anyone before. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered, though his hands never left my body. "Then don't let go," I said, my voice shaking, and he crushed his lips back to mine. That was the night I realized we had stepped past the point of return. We were no longer just indulging in a forbidden kiss or a reckless impulse. We were in something far deeper, far more dangerous. He didn't just want me, he needed me, the same way I needed him. And that terrified me, but the fear didn't stop us. We found ways to keep feeding the fire. He started coming by when my father was out, always with some excuse ready if anyone asked. Sometimes he would just sit with me, his hand brushing mine, as we talked about everything and nothing. Other times, the restraint would break, and he'd pull me into his arms, kissing me like a man starved. Like every second might be the last. I knew it was wrong. I knew we were lying, betraying, risking everything. But when he held me, the world disappeared. It was just us, our breaths mingling, our hearts racing, our bodies pressed together in a way that felt inevitable. One evening, as we sat together, in the quiet of my room, I asked him the question that had been eating at me. "Do you ever wish we had met differently?" Without all of this complication. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. Finally, he lifted his gaze to mine. "Every day," he admitted. "But if it meant not knowing you, not feeling this, then no. I wouldn't trade it." His words sank into me like a truth I'd been too afraid to admit. We were caught in something neither of us could undo, something too powerful to walk away from, and yet the guilt lingered. Every time my father smiled at him, every time he patted him on the back and called him brother, my chest tightened until I thought I couldn't breathe. If my father ever knew, it would destroy him. It would destroy us all. But even that wasn't enough to stop me. Because when David looked at me, really looked at me, it wasn't just desire in his eyes. It was something deeper, something terrifying, something I couldn't help but crave love. And I knew no matter how hard we tried, we weren't going to let each other go. The summer grew hotter, and so did the secret we carried between us. Every day, I felt like I was walking on a thread stretched tight, ready to snap at any moment. My father, oblivious to the undercurrent, trusted David more than anyone. He leaned on him for advice, laughed with him like a brother, and never suspected that every time David and I exchanged a glance, the world tilted just enough to betray us if anyone was paying attention. The longer it went on, the more reckless we became. David would brush his fingers against mine under the table when we all had dinner together. He'd find reasons to stop by when my father wasn't home, telling himself it was just to check on me. But the moment the door closed behind him, our restraint would vanish. We'd lose ourselves in each other, kissing like we were trying to. Memorize every second. He always left before my father returned, but sometimes just minutes before the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My heart nearly gave out each time. There were moments, though, that didn't feel like stolen sins. There were quiet ones when we'd sit close, his arm around me, and I'd lean against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He'd talk about things he had never shared with anyone else, his regrets, the mistakes that haunted him, the loneliness he'd carried for years. And I'd confess how small I felt in my father's shadow, how suffocating it was to always be his daughter and never just myself. Those moments scared me more than the kisses, because they weren't about lust. They were about love, but guilt gnawed at me. Every time my father looked me in the eyes, I wondered if he saw the truth hidden beneath mine. I'd lie awake at night, turning over the same questions in my head. How long could we keep this up? What would happen when it all came crashing down? And yet, when the morning came and David's eyes met mine across a crowded room, I knew I'd do it all again. One evening, everything nearly fell apart. My father decided to throw a small gathering, just a few close friends, and of course, David was there. I spent the entire night trying to act normal, but every time I felt David's gaze, heat crept up my neck. Later, when most of the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet, I slipped into the kitchen to catch my breath. He followed a few minutes later. It should have been knocking a glass of water. A brief word, but the air between us was charged. He stood close, too close, his shoulder brushing mine as he reached for a bottle. My heart thundered in my chest, and I could feel the tremor in his hand when it grazed mine. I didn't think. I just turned. His lips were on mine in an instant. Desperate, hungry. The world around us disappeared until a sound at the doorway made me freeze. My father's voice carried down the hall, laughing with someone as they made their way back inside. David and I pulled apart like we'd been burned, scrambling to hide what had just happened. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the glass I held. Seconds later, my father walked in, oblivious, still chuckling with a friend, while David leaned casually against the counter as though nothing had happened. I don't think I breathed again until they left the room. That night, lying in bed, I realized how dangerously close we were to being caught. The fear should have stopped me, but instead, it only made me cling tighter to him, because I had already reached the point where I couldn't imagine a life without him. The following weeks became even more intense. We started sneaking around like conspirators in our own home. Every stolen moment both a thrill and a punishment. There were times he'd hold me and whisper that we should end it, that it wasn't fair to my father, that one day we'd regret it all. But his lips would always find mine before the words had finished leaving his mouth. One night, when the house was quiet and the air was heavy with summer rain, we found ourselves alone again. He kissed me with a desperation that bordered on breaking, then pulled back and pressed his forehead against mine. "If this comes out," he whispered, his voice raw, "I'll lose everything. Your father, my best friend, you. And yet, I can't stay away from you. God help me, I don't want to." I held his face in my hands, my own tears threatening to fall. "Then don't let go of me. Even if the whole world burns, don't let go." In that moment, we both knew there was no going back. We We're too far gone, too deeply entangled in something we had no business feeling. It wasn't just temptation anymore. It was love. A forbiddance, dangerous, impossible love, but real all the same. And Eva's guilt loomed like a storm cloud over. Neither of us was willing to let the other go. The rain poured harder that night, rattling against the windows like impatient fingers trying to break through. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. It hadn't for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face, sometimes soft with longing, sometimes tormented with guilt, always hovering in that space between right and wrong. I heard the faint creak of the stairs, the kind that only someone who knew the house well would make without thinking. My breath caught in my throat. I knew it was him before he even pushed the door open. His silhouette was faint in the dim glow of the hallway light. He hesitated as though one more step might be the point of no return. But then he crossed the threshold, closing the door softly behind him. Neither of us spoke. Words would only make what we were doing more real, more dangerous. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. My chest tightened when I felt his hand, trembling slightly, trace the outline of mine. I turned toward him, and in the silence, we gave in again. His lips pressed to mine, not hurried this time, but slow, lingering, as though he wanted to remember every second. The world outside didn't exist. There was only the storm, the darkness, and when dawn broke, pale light spilling into the room, he was still there, lying beside me with his arm draped over my waist. I could hear his heartbeat under my ear, steady but heavy with the knowledge of what we had done. For the first time, the weight of it hit me fully. This wasn't just a kiss stolen in the shadows. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. We had crossed the line so deeply there was no way back. He left before my father woke, slipping quietly down the stairs like a thief in the night. I stayed in bed, staring at the empty space where he'd been, my body still warm from his touch, my mind spiraling in every direction. How long could we possibly keep this hidden? Days blurred into weeks, and the secrecy twisted tighter around. Every look exchanged across a crowded room was a risk. Every time he brushed past me, every word whispered too close, carried the possibility of exposure. And yet, the thrill of it the thrill kept me running back to him. He made me feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. But David wasn't built for deception. I could see it in his eyes, the way he struggled when my father clapped him on the back with that easy trust, when they sat together laughing about old memories. He would glance at me sometimes so quickly no one else could notice, but in that glance, there was a storm raging, a man tearing himself apart from the inside. One evening, my father announced we were going away for the weekend. A cabin trip, just the three of us, the kind of thing we used to do when I was younger. He was excited, talking about fishing and grilling and long hikes. I smiled, nodding, pretending I shared his enthusiasm, but inside dread settled like a stone in my stomach. Being trapped with both of them for days felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. One wrong move away from disaster at the cabin, the tension was unbearable. David tried to keep his distance, but every time my father left the room, his eyes found mine like magnets drawn together. One night, after my father had gone to bed, I slipped outside to breathe in the cool night air. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, and the silence felt almost holy. David followed. I felt him before I saw him, the air shifting as he came to stand beside me. "We can't keep doing this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's not fair, not to him, not to us." My throat tightened. And what would stopping fix? "Do you think I can just erase this? Erase you?" He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No, but we'll destroy everything if we don't." His words cut, but I knew he was right. And still, when he reached for me, when his hand slid into mine, I didn't pull away. We kissed again under that moonlight, desperate and aching. knowing every second was another thread unraveling the fabric of our lives. The next morning, my father caught us thought it was nothing dramatic, not at first. He came downstairs earlier than usual just as David and I were pulling apart in the kitchen. The look on his face was one I'll never forget: confusion at first, then dawning horror as the pieces fell into place. His eyes darted between us, searching for any explanation that could make what he saw untrue. But there wasn't one. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting could have been. My father's face crumbled, his mouth opening as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. He turned and walked out of the cabin, the door slamming so hard behind him the windows rattled. David stood frozen, his face pale, his hands shaking. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who made me feel alive, but as someone who had lost everything in the space of a heartbeat. I wanted to chase after my father, to beg him to understand. But what could I possibly say? That it was love. Not just lust? That didn't matter. All he would see was betrayal from the man he trusted most. And from his own daughter, David whispered my name, his voice breaking, and when I looked at him, I saw the weight of his guilt finally crushing him. "It's over," he said, more to himself than to me. "It has to be." But even as he said it, I knew in my heart that letting him go would be impossible.